and I'll let you know.
Okay.
Good. Thanks, CJ. Oh. We're now.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, good morning.
We'll wait maybe a minute, just let people sign in and then get started.
Hi, Donna. Glad you can make it. Again, I wish I could hear all of your voices, but we cannot.
Oh yeah, friendly reminder, yeah, everyone's muted, so please use the chat box, but I think most of you know the drill now.
Yep. Hi, Ryan. And everything in the chat will be recorded. So the first part of the session will be a presentation, and then we'll follow up with questions, answers, ideas, suggestions. We'll get to that. But feel free to put everything into the chat, and we'll try and follow up best we can right now. But if any of our answers are unsatisfactory, or we need to check up on some stuff, we will make sure to do so. So we'll go through the chat and make sure that we've addressed everything.
Yep, and with that, I'll get started just with introduction. So for those who don't know me, Julianne Schroeder. I'm in the tribal branch here at EPA Region 9. I am a project officer, so I manage a few different grants, and I also am the Art Talk coordinator.
And I'm Nico Anderson, GAP project officer for the last 4-5 years now. I forget. COVID has completely derailed me. I'm like, how long have the last 2 years been? Yeah, work with tribes in Northern California, Nevada, and Arizona, kind of across Region 9, and the solid waste liaison as well. So if you have solid waste related questions, you can always reach out to me directly, even if I'm not your GAP PO. But happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to get. Hopefully we can see everyone in person soon. So today we're going to be talking about progress reporting and end-of-year evaluations for GAP. And GAP is the General Assistance Program for all the new environmental directors. Let me see if there we go. This is the objectives for the session today. We're going to review some of the regulations around this reporting. We're going to talk about the responsibilities that both EPA and grantees have in this process. Try to convey how we at EPA assess progress. We're going to talk about how to make work plan and budget modifications when needed. Review some tools and templates available to help streamline the process. Talk about some tips and tricks to reporting. And then we'll have time, as Nico was saying, just to answer your questions and also get some input on the process. So I'll go through some of the regs right now. I won't read this line for line, but the PowerPoint is uploaded as a file. And so if you want to reference it, you can use the PowerPoint, and there's links in there as well. So reporting frequency for the progress reports. So those tend to be, for most GAP grantees, required on a quarterly basis. According to our regs, progress reports have to happen no more frequently than quarterly, but at least annually. And that all the reports are due within 60 days after the end of the reporting period. But in most of our GAP grantees' terms and conditions in the award, it says that progress reports should be provided quarterly, and they're due 30 days after the reporting period. And in the regs, it also talks about what should actually be within the progress reports. So it should include a description of the work accomplished, and if there's any delays or any other problems. Comparison of what was completed and to the project schedule, And again, if there's any discrepancies, an explanation of those. It should look at the estimated funds spent to date to plan expenditures. And then finally, there should be an estimate of the time and funds needed to complete the work and a comparison of that estimate to the times and funds remaining. So basically it's just saying, are we on track? You know, have you met all the outputs and outcomes? And then at the end of the year, we have a joint evaluation. And I did want to bring this up that evaluation process should be a joint process. It says so in our regs, and actually should be developed jointly as well. And Nico's going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation, about how we can better address this, this regulation. And then what are the elements of the evaluation process? Well, there's two different ones. There's the discussion aspect. So there should be a discussion between EPA and the grantees of accomplishments, the effectiveness of the work performed, existing and potential problem areas, and suggestions for improvement. And then there also needs to be some sort of written report that gets placed in our official files. All right, so now I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the responsibilities that both EPA and the grantee has. I'll start with the grantees. So they have to provide a progress report at the frequency found within the award's terms and conditions. And as I said before, that's usually a quarterly report. Also, the grantee needs to ensure that the progress reports describe the status of each commitment. So is the activity on schedule? Are the costs consistent with the budget? And if there are any changes that are needed based on progress to date to the work plan or the budget. And the grantee also needs to provide deliverables as stated in the work plan. They also need to provide a final financial report that shows the expenditures for the previous fiscal year by the end of the calendar year. And they need to review and provide feedback on the end of year evaluation report that will be drafted. And there's usually a negotiated time provided between the project officer and the grantee. I usually ask for some feedback a few weeks after receipt of the report, but that can vary. And then here are the responsibilities of the EPA Project Officer. We need to review the progress reports, and we should ask clarifying questions when needed. We should meet with the grantee to discuss and approve the work plan and budget or budget change requests. So this is really important that we are available. If you want to make any changes to your work plan or budget, please reach out to your project officer throughout the year. And that's something that we can look at and approve or ask clarifying questions on. We also need to provide technical assistance when requested. So that's kind of our tribal liaison role. And that's even if we might not have a resource or know the answer to a question, we'll try to find someone that does. So please, again, reach out to us with any of your questions that you might have related to technical assistance. And then we also need to draft an end of year evaluation report. And we use the progress reports, expenditures to date, and any deliverable provided to help us draft that report. But we also need to incorporate any feedback that you guys have before finalizing the report. So what's the purpose of progress reporting? I think it's important that we just visit that. So just talking about all the requirements, why are we even doing this? So it really is a good tool for the grantee. It can help track your progress and also help you identify areas that might need focus or you might need more assistance. It also will help you determine if spending is consistent with the work completed. So you kind of check in and say, okay, I've expended this many funds, so far. Does that make sense with the amount of work that's been completed, or am I off under or over budget in some way? And it'll help you make determinations of when a work plan or budget change is needed during a year. And that's really important to you can always request those to the project officer. So how do we at EPA, as a project officer, assess your progress? So at the end of the year, we do look at the amount of work completed, usually on a commitment level, to determine the total amount of supported expenditures. So how do we do that? We refer to your work plan, because your work plan has commitment costs, and we use that to determine, well, how much is it to fully complete each of your commitments? And then we also determine, well, how much of the work was completed for each commitment, whether fully completed, partially completed, and usually assign a percentage. And then we use that approach to determine the total amount of justifiable or supported expenditures. And we look at that number, and then we look at what's in your final financial report, your FFR, to see if the work completed is commensurate with expenditures. And I'll show an example of this in the next slide. And I do want to also say that in our regulations, it talks about if there's disagreements between us and the grantee about the evaluation. Those disagreements should be resolved at the lowest level possible, which means at the project at the project officer level, when possible. So trying to say is we really want to work together with the grantee to try to resolve issues if there's any disagreement between how we evaluate the work completed and what you think the evaluation report should look like. So here's an example of us assessing progress. So this is a common work plan commitment is to do newsletters on a quarterly basis to tribal community. And in this work plan, the grantee had committed to complete 4 newsletters, and estimated it would cost $4,000 approximately when they consider staff time and materials. At the end of the fiscal year, only 3 newsletters were completed. So the EPA project officer, just using simple math, will consider the commitment 75% completed and estimate that about $3,000 of justifiable or supported expenditures there's $3,000 of justifiable or supported expenditures for that task. I'm going to pause and say this number may change. So this is where you can come and say, oh, we weren't able to do that 4th newsletter, something else came up, but we were able to accomplish the same goal by doing such and such, and it costs about the same amount of money. So in this example, the grantee informs EPA that, well, we did a radio show and it was done in that quarter that we didn't have time for the newsletter, and it provided the same desired outcome. And that's the kind of information we need to say, oh, okay, so we can give you credit for that, and it's a gap as long as it's a gap eligible activity, and it's and we think it's equivalent to what your desire to complete. And those are things that we will look at to decide whether or not we'll accept the changes. And that brings in, I do want to say, those are discussions we can have at the end of the year, but it's great if we can get that information actually during the year. So we really encourage grantees to let us know if they want to make changes to the work plan or budget. So if in the middle of the year you say, oh, I'm not going to do a newsletter, I'm going to do this radio show, just send us an email, give us a call, and let us know that's the plan. So here's another example of this. So this one's a very common example too. With COVID, there's been a lot of cancellation of outreach events. So in this scenario, the grantee was planning on an Earth Day event, had to cancel it due to COVID concerns. So they asked if they can use that money that was planned for the event to instead invest in solid waste supplies. So then us as a project officer, we would review the new costs and make sure that they're gap eligible and that they're reasonable. We would then request an updated work plan and budget, just simply showing maybe in red or track changes like the changes you made. And that shows the shift of time from time and outreach supplies that you had originally budgeted for the Earth Day event to the new solid waste supplies. And this avoids us at the end of the year saying, oh, the Earth Day commitment was incomplete and marking it as such. Instead, it's removed entirely from our evaluation report, and instead we provide credit for the purchase of new solid waste supplies that was added. And then submitting deliverables, I just want to emphasize that in your work plan, it should list what deliverables are required for each of your commitments. So make sure you review your work plan and remind yourself through the year what your required deliverables are to EPA and to your project officer, and that you're documenting the activities that you're doing. In terms of submitting the deliverables to EPA, you can use email, but oftentimes the file size is too large. So there's other options. You can use OneDrive or other file transfer sites. Some of my grantees have used Google Docs, and that's worked fine for me. I also sometimes provide a link to a OneDrive folder so that the grantee can upload their files there. So just ask the project officer, but there's flexibility. And if possible, it's great if we can have the commitment number in the file, its name, or even if it's just a component number, that's helpful too. It helps us with making sure that we're not missing any deliverables when we're doing the evaluation report. And it's also, I think, helpful for the grantee for easy reference. And so this is a reminder that we really do rely on those deliverables to do an assessment of work completed. So make sure that they're not missing, because if they are, then you might not receive a credit for the work that you completed. Okay, so as I talked about how we assess project, we will create a draft end of year report after the end of the fiscal year. And we usually provide that report around the beginning of the calendar year, depending on when we receive the final financial report, and if there's a lot of questions about the work completed. And so we will, once we have drafted something, we will request your review and response. I usually ask for a response within 2 weeks, just because sometimes there's a lot of back and forth. And so it might be 2 weeks here, and then 2 weeks there, and 2 weeks there, and it adds up. But that can be a negotiated time frame. And then you should definitely advocate and let your project officer know if you disagree with the draft report in any way. Because we sometimes miss things, or we just don't have all the information, obviously. So let us know if you disagree with the percentage of work completed, the cost of the work completed, maybe things took more time than expected. If there's any missing deliverables that we didn't account for, please let us know. And sometimes, often we'll request a follow-up discussion. And I think this is really consistent with our regulations too. An evaluation should include discussions. And it's useful to clarify what was actually completed. So I'm going to pass it on to Nico now to talk about some of the tools and templates that are available.
Great. Thanks, Julianne. Before I get started here, I just want to make sure that everyone can hear and see us. So can we just get, a few folks to confirm that in the chat, a thumbs up or something. Got it. Okay. It sounds like folks can hear us. And then, Rob, we've got your question there, and we'll cover it at the end. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so as everyone's aware, we do have a variety of templates available. that can help streamline the reporting and end of year joint evaluation process. And they can, mostly be found on the EPA Region 9 Tribal GAP page. So we've included a link here in the presentation. You can control and select that link, and it'll bring you right to the web page. But you can always, if you don't have this presentation handy, you can always just Google EPA Region 9 GAP, and it'll be the first page that pops up. And you can just scroll down, and you'll see a lot of different links. I think that web page makes you download the file itself to your computer, and you can explore the different templates that we have. And they were all developed over the years to give a lot of different formats and sort of flexibilities to project officers and grantees. But in some ways it's created, more complexity and confusion than it needed to. So, we'll discuss a possible solution to that, towards the end here. But before that, I want to kind of go over some of the templates that we currently have, as we'll be using them, for right now and over the next year. So this first example template has been around for several years, and it's based off of a work plan. So you can see that it's exact same sort of format as a work plan. Work plan is on the left, and then the grantee reports cumulatively each quarter to the right. And in this particular example, it's pretty text heavy, which is good. We like all of that information. But, I'll show you a couple other options in just a second. But here, the most important thing with all of these templates is that they contain the required, components. So you have your update, your commitment, your description of work accomplished to the right for each quarter. And importantly, as Julianne already covered, it identifies which deliverables were submitted for each commitment and to where. So email, OneDrive, that helps us sort of go back if we can't find one to see actually what was submitted exactly and where it was uploaded. And then I'll get to this more in a second, but some kind of status update. So status update during progress reporting, whether it's on schedule, or you could even identify a % complete, which just helps us, do the evaluation, kind of track where you are. But again, if there are specific questions or comments that you have for the PO, there's not a place in this template, but we do recommend that you reach out always in an email and follow up. So it's a shared responsibility of GAP project officers and grantees to follow up on any questions from any of the progress reporting or the end of year joint evaluation. But we do recommend that if you have specific questions and concerns, that you make them known. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And this template is from the GAP workbook, also available on the GAP website. And it basically, it demonstrates how sort of short and sweet reporting can be. This one has very concise descriptions of work accomplished, identifies where deliverables were uploaded, the status update, % complete, a column for questions and comments, and then there's also a column there for EPA's response, so that we can even document the back and forth and the conversation if it's taking place virtually or online. And there are drop downs in some of those just for convenience, where you can select status update, and a list of options will pop up. So we've tried to make it as convenient and user friendly as possible. Although if you're not familiar with Excel, it can be incredibly frustrating. And so one of the things that we've heard about this is that the boxes aren't big enough, and there are ways that you can expand the size of the box to fit any size text. And so we just recommend again that you reach out to your project officer or myself directly. And I'm more than willing to troubleshoot through that and kind of show you again some tips and tricks. So there are some videos online, and there's also a tutorial about how to use this gap workbook, so you can explore those first. But again, always reach out to your gap project officer or myself, and I'll try to work through some of that stuff. Next slide.
There we go.
Great. Let's see. Okay, so another really simple template, and this is also sort of demonstrates like how concise these reports actually can be. And so the one thing that I just want to call out here is that what makes this an end of year evaluation essentially is that it just has a column for supported expenditures. It's a cumulative report. At this point, it only has 2 quarters reported, but you can kind of see throughout the year where you're at. And so some of these templates have been pre-formatted. So if you just go in and identify what you think the % complete is, then it'll calculate at present the supported expenditures. And again, that's an incredibly rough estimate, but it kind of reveals the starting point and like what we as project officers initially see. And we want to give grantees the opportunity to provide that information and their self-evaluation before the ball gets rolling. So you guys have all of the information of what transpired, how far you got, based on your original commitments, if anything changed. And so we really appreciate if you provide that information to us just up front. And Julianne kind of covered this earlier, but say you only got, 3 out of your 4 deliverables submitted, but there's good reason for that. You can provide that information in your end of year, be it in one of the columns or in a separate email, and just explain what transpired. So some things costing more can be, a valid reason for why you weren't able to get all of the original deliverables submitted. And so that's when the conversation takes place. But it helps us as project officers if you provide a lot of that information up front, so then we don't have to kind of dig around and put the puzzle pieces together. And yeah, next slide. Okay, so this would not be a tips and tricks presentation if we didn't have at least one slide on it. So, I just wanted to include, Julianne covered some of this and I just covered it again. But here are, some of the takeaways or best practices from this presentation. Use either the gap workbook or any other template that you prefer. So whether it's stylistically or whether it's based off of the work plan that you currently use, using a template can be really helpful. Label the deliverables with name and the commitment number. That helps us organize it, as well as you to keep track of that. Identify in the reports when and to where deliverables were sent. Include status updates if they're quarterly reports, and self-evaluations if they're end of years. Request work plan and budget modifications if needed throughout the year to avoid any discrepancies at the end of the year, and then follow up with emails or call with requests, questions, and comments. And again, following up, it's not the responsibility of the grantee to do this, but those grantees of mine that write emails or call afterwards and say, hey, did everything make sense? Did you get all of my deliverables? It helps keep me on top of it, and it doesn't let a lot of time sort of pass by before we're able to review the quarterly report. So if you have specific questions, please make them known. Okay, next slide. Great. Okay, so just in review, today we covered some of the regulations, and again, there are more, but we just kind of went over some that are pertinent to our current process and what is potentially to come. went over some of the rights and responsibilities and expectations around reporting, the reporting process itself, or the sequence of events, as well as how EPA assesses progress, and then provided some templates, tools, and tips and tricks. And again, those templates and tools can be found on that webpage, but you can always reach out to your project officer and ask for different ones, or ones maybe that they would recommend, given your particular work plan and situation. With all of this being said, we just kind of covered our current process.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't mean to. I just thought maybe we should address the couple questions that came in about our current process before we.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So Rob Roy had a few questions. One was if our the end of year, the valuation process is different for PPGs versus GAP standalone. And I can tell you that I do my own evaluation for the GAP portion of a PPG, and then that the water or air or whatever the other program that's within that PPG, they will do their own evaluation, and then we just send separate reports. Some project officers will just make one PDF of the report, but the process on the GAP side stays the same. And Nico, let me know if you have anything to add to that. And then there's a question also about if we have a recommended reporting format for collaborative site, like if someone put something on OneDrive, do we have a recommended format for that? And I don't. I tell my grantees that, and project officers might have a preference. I tell my grantees use what's easiest for them, and we'll work with it. We are really proud of our workbook, and we think it's a great tool, but I understand it's not for everyone because it's Excel. So I would just say use the tool that works best for you for the progress reports.
Yeah, and I would say, Julianne said, we try to be as accommodating as possible. So, make it known if you have a preference for, where you want to upload deliverables or how you want to send them. I usually defer to my grantees, whatever is easiest and best for them. And so again, make your preference known. But as we don't have a national system or central repository for deliverables, we're kind of in this situation. Where we're sort of responsible for collecting them and organizing them on our own. And so that may change in the future, but for the time being, there may be more options out there. So right now I only receive deliverables, via email or in a OneDrive folder, but there may be other options available as well. So if you know of any, please recommend them. And then I see Donna's comment here. What is the process to change the reporting from quarterly to semi-annually? And we will discuss that in just a second, that particular option, because, after reading the regs, you realize that, it does allow for less frequent reporting. Mm-hmm. And so, we'd like to have that conversation with all of you and to come up with something that makes sense, either for everyone or on a case-by-case basis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
And then here's a question from Rob about the closeout of a PPG. So, yeah, PPGs can be 5 years, and the closeout is the lead project officer for that PPG will take the lead on the closeout and will coordinate with the other programs project officer regarding expenditures and work completed before closeout.
Right, and a lot of these questions are kind of getting to, the process that has been in place, and it's a varied one, and so there are different templates and tools, and there are different approaches to evaluating the work. Project officers do things differently, and so we want to address that. We realize that it's been confusing, and there are some discrepancies, and so we're really at a point where we'd like to improve the process, and we don't think it can be done without your help. And so with that, Julianne, should I proceed?
Yeah, just the last thing, Destiny responded also on the semi-annual reporting and said that we do have some grantees on it. So you can submit that request in writing to your project officer. It is an option.
Great, thanks, Destiny. Yep.
But yeah, let's move forward.
Okay. Yeah, so here's a whole list of why we think we need to review our current process, reporting process, and the end of year joint evaluation process. And number one, make sure we meet the regulations that Julianne covered earlier. And in reading those, we think we could have a process that complies with those regulations more than our current process. So that is a goal. Ensure that tribes are partners in the design and management of the end of year process. Very important, as stated in the regs, to provide a better understanding of the roles and responsibilities of everyone, allow tribes flexibility to request more time to complete specific activities and to revise their work plans during the year, and make sure that tribes know that they have that option. They can always modify their work plans up until a certain point. There are, oftentimes in the last year, if it's in the fourth quarter, no longer sort of makes sense to do that. But again, these are conversations to have with your project officer. Ensure tribes and EPA have a common understanding of what a completed activity is. And so to come up with a definition of significant or substantial, a lot of the terms in the regulations are, subjective, and we'd like to define them a little bit more. We'd like to ensure that tribes have a way to assess their own progress, mutually agree on how to address issues of overspending and underspending, ensure that the process is as efficient and accurate as possible, or lean. You guys may have heard, but we kind of went through some lean exercises in our grant process that we actually found to be really, really beneficial. And we were able to cut a lot of things out that weren't needed, that we had been doing just because it was the way we had always done them. And so, starting from scratch and with the regulations, and then sort of developing a new system can be really beneficial for everyone. And of course, make sure that the grants and files are as audit proof as possible, and then that the design and process is solution oriented. And so, we don't want the progress reporting or end of year to be punitive in any way. We think that there's an opportunity for us for both parties, for grantees and for EPA, to see these progress reports as an opportunity to address issues and to learn as much from them as possible. So whether it's in budget modifications of understanding actually how much activity costs, so that you can incorporate that knowledge into next year's work plan and budget a little bit better, or to identify technical assistance that you may need, whether it be from EPA or another agency. And so, with as transparent a process as possible, we think that we can, service you all better. And so that is ultimately the goal. And these are just some things that we came up with, but there are probably many more, and we'd like to hear what you have to think about it. And then here is, again, just a tentative plan for this collaboration. We've already reached out to the RTALK, GAP, and grant work groups and plan on having some of the initial conversations in those forums. But we also will have online interactive sessions so that everyone can participate and chime in. And we plan to share any and all developments and documents online so that folks can comment on those in writing. And then we will provide updates during our talk meetings and elsewhere. And again, these are just some of the initial ideas. We're open to including any others that you have. Timeline, we think the soonest would be to have a final process in place for fiscal year 23 progress reporting and end of years, but that is a stretch goal. And I want to emphasize that we want as much input and consensus as possible. So do not want to rush things. And the timeline itself will also be jointly decided in those work groups and on the online sessions. So we want to do it right. And then some of the questions, there's many questions, but just some here are, what are your ideas in general to improve this process? How would you like it to look? Should there be fewer progress reports, as we kind of already talked about? Would you appreciate more check-ins, like more phone calls instead of reporting and writing? And should there be a more simplified end-of-year process? If so, what would it look like? And then how can we better meet our objectives and our shared objectives? So I know that there are many more, but that just kind of gets us the ball rolling. And with that, we'd like to hear from you. So again, we apologize for this forum. We wish we could hear your voices and actually have a more dynamic conversation. But this is really just the very beginning. So, feel free to include any ideas, suggestions, questions, comments in the chat right now, knowing again that all of this will be recorded and we will go through them, one by one. And so sort of the floor is open. Feel free to type in the chat. And again, we've just included our emails there. So if you guys have any additional questions specific to this presentation, you can send them, directly to Julianne or myself.
Yeah, or if you have ideas of how we can improve the process, you can also email us. So there was a question that came in that looks like Destiny answered of how many tribes are project officers assigned. It does depend on the office, and it can vary in the tribal branch. We have the newer project officers might not have as many grants assigned to them as some of the more seasoned project officers. It can vary from 8 to 12, but there's a wide range. To 15, yeah, especially for short staff.
But our goal is to hire more folks and to reduce that number so that we can give better technical assistance and service to the grantees that we have. So let's see. Robert asks, when do you think EPA will be able to do visits to the tribes? It's a great question. We've been wondering that for as long as we've been at home, and really hope that the travel restrictions are lifted. There are, I think, a few situations in which if there's an immediate concern, some travel may be allowed. So if you would like a visit from your project officer, I think you can put that in writing and let it be known. Otherwise, we're on kind of the edge of our seats as well, waiting for a final answer on when we can get back out and see y'all.
So there's a question here about where we can find the tracking templates. I'll put the link in the chat box. It's also in the PowerPoint that should be uploaded under files.
Yeah, and as Destiny mentioned, many are on the GAP web page. But there are a few others floating around. And so if the ones on that page don't suffice, or you're interested in seeing some others, reach out to your project officer and they can send you a few more. And Donna, I agree. We could have covered that here, but it was also covered. I think there was a presentation like a GAP 101 and also a presentation on writing work plans. And so it was focused, that was addressed in those presentations. But, and I think those would also be recorded. So if there are new environmental directors and they'd like, more information on that, look to those presentations for that information. And do folks have any initial ideas on what a new end of year evaluation could or should look like? I know that there were already some questions about, reporting less semi-annually throughout the year as an option. Great. But again, we'd really like, to hear everybody's input on it. So whether this presentation is the forum or you'd like to participate in the work groups, you can let Julianne and I know that as well. And we will keep, everybody posted on any developments or decisions that are made.
It's a question from Robertson. Do we work with tribes in Arizona? We do. Yeah, our region covers tribes within California, Nevada, and Arizona. And yeah, please feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about the GAP program or applying for a GAP grant in your tribe. We're happy to help.
Mm-hmm. And neither of us work directly with San Carlos Apache, but there's a project officer in our section that does. And so you can reach out to them, or you can always reach out to us and we'll connect you with that person.
I'll look up really quickly who that is. So the project officer is Veronica Swan. So I'll put her email address in for you, Robertson.
And Ryan, hi Ryan.
And her phone number.
He shares, EPA PO John Herbst has shared a very helpful quarterly reporting template that makes end-of-year reporting easy for the both of us. And so that may be one of the templates that's already on the GAP webpage. But again, if not, feel free to include it here or send to us, and we can always upload it as an attachment so that folks have it. And again, I think that raises a really, that's another tip, really important, is just reach out to other tribes in your area for templates that they may be using or ways that they may be going about things. And so I think that's always valuable. There may be folks that have come up with their own templates that are even better than the ones we're currently using. So ask around until you find one that works. But again, we'd really like to develop something over the next year or two that could be used by most folks that we all agree to.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Miss hearing your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa asked, how has COVID affected other tribes completing deliverables? I feel like I did so bad this year, but then hearing others did too. Is Region 9 grading the same as other years or grading on a curve? We do understand that COVID has had major impacts, and a lot of times environmental directors have had to take administrative leave, or they're not able to travel to what they wanted to. So we've tried to provide as much flexibility as we can. And we do definitely take that into account in our reporting. Nico, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you may have been, asking this tongue in cheek, but obviously we're not doing any grading. But if you feel that, COVID was the, primary reason for why certain things did not get accomplished, again, state that, in your progress reports and in your end of year evaluation, because we have flexibility to, really address that. We know that COVID has impacted everyone. And then, of course, the work on the ground. And so when your work is being impacted by COVID or anything, again, reach out to your project officer to make work plan changes. You can, change things from in-person to virtual, get rid of certain commitments. We understand that certain activities may cost more because of, COVID complications. And so it has impacted everyone. You are not alone. And just, be upfront with that with your project officer, and we will do everything that we can, to understand that, and to, resolve any issues.
Robertson's asking, could we come and visit and make a presentation? So currently we're not traveling, unfortunately, but when we are able to travel, then yes, that's definitely something we can plan.
And Robertson, I'll be in touch. I'll reach out to Veronica, the project officer there, and see, if during her first site visit, this presentation or one similar can't be given. So we'll get that organized.
Any other questions? I know it's 9:50, so but we're happy to stay for a few more minutes if anyone else has any questions or any suggestions.
I hope before 2030. Oh,
Me
man.
too. Oh my goodness. We were saying earlier in one of our other sessions that visiting with the grantees and visiting with the tribes is one of our favorite parts of our job, so we miss it.
Yeah. Great. Yep. Hope you guys found it informative, and starts gets folks thinking about the end of year process and reporting and how we'd like that to look. And so again, reach out to Julianne or myself. Our emails are included in the presentation, and you'll be hearing more from us shortly. So thank you, everyone. Wish we could hear your voices and even better see you in person. So hopefully the next Art Talk be in person, and we don't have to wait for a whole nother year. But we wish everyone the best, and hope you've had a great conference so far. So with that, we'll say goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.